The moment my parents sat me down and said the word, adopted, the entire 17-year-old version of me dissolved, leaving a stranger staring back at them. But that wasn't even the biggest lie. My name is Chloe, and for every day of my life until that conversation, I was the spitting image of my dad's side of the family. The same dark, unruly hair, the same deep-set brown eyes. It was a fact, a piece of familial lore we'd trot out at every holiday gathering. Now, that simple truth has become the foundation of a life I'm no longer sure I've actually lived. My parents, Sarah and Mark, are good people, the best, really. As I sat there on our worn floral couch, the air thick with their careful, rehearsed apologies, I couldn't even summon anger. All I felt was a profound and hollow sense of dislocation. They had loved me, supported my questionable garage band phase, and held me when my first ever boyfriend broke my heart. They were mom and dad. The revelation didn't change the love, but it fractured the reality of it, turning my history into a storybook they had written for me. My mind, however, didn't linger on them. It drifted, inexplicably, to my mom's best friend, Lena, my Aunt Lena. She's not my real aunt, of course, a fact that suddenly felt heavy with irony. Lena has been a permanent fixture in my life, a second son to my mom's primary star. She's the one who taught me how to apply eyeliner without looking like a raccoon, the one who took me for my first driving lesson because my mom was too nervous, the one whose hugs have always felt a little too tight, a little too desperate. People have always commented on our similarities, a joke we'd share between us. "You got your mom's kindness, but you got my fire," she'd say with a wink, tapping the tip of my nose. We have the same laugh, a slightly breathless cackle that starts in the chest. We have the same crooked smile. We have the same single dimple on our left cheek. It was always just a funny coincidence, a testament to how much time we spent together. Now, sitting in the silence of my parents' confession, I can't stop picturing her face, recalling the way her eyes would sometimes search mine, holding a look of such intense, aching familiarity that it felt like she was seeing someone else entirely. The silence in the room stretched, thin and fragile. My parents watched me, their faces a mixture of fear and desperate hope, waiting for me to scream or cry or do something. But I was frozen, my thoughts a chaotic slideshow of memories, each one now tainted. Every "you look just like your father" from a distant relative, every childhood photo where I was sandwiched between Sarah and Mark, a perfect little trio. It was all a carefully constructed stage play, and I was the only one who didn't have the script. My entire life, my very face, felt like borrowed property. The fact that I was adopted wasn't just a piece of new information, it was a wrecking ball to the foundation of who I believed myself to be. The real casualty in that moment wasn't my love for my parents, it was my trust in my own story. That's the thing that's at stake, isn't it? My entire past. If this was a lie, what else was? I looked from Mom's gentle, worried face to Dad's, his hands clasped so tightly his knuckles were white. These were the people who taught me to be honest, to always tell the truth, no matter how hard it was. The hypocrisy of it all was a bitter pill, but still, my mind kept snagging on Lena, on her laugh, which I can now hear echoing in my own, on the way she'd tuck a stray piece of my unruly hair behind my ear, her touch lingering for a fraction of a second too long. I remember my 16th birthday. She'd given me a silver locket, nothing fancy, but when I opened it, it was empty. "So you can put whoever you want in there," she'd said, her voice thick with an emotion I didn't understand at the time. "Your first love, your best friend, someone who means the world to you." Her eyes were shining with unshed tears, and I'd hugged her, confused but touched. Now the memory feels sinister, a coded message I was too naive to decipher. Lena, my mom's fun-loving, slightly chaotic best friend, has suddenly become the keeper of a secret that redefines my entire existence. She's not just my aunt anymore. She's a question mark, a potential answer I'm terrified to hear. This whole situation feels so isolating, like I'm adrift in the middle of an ocean with no land in sight. If you've ever felt like your world has been turned completely upside down, maybe you get it. I don't know if you're out there listening, maybe like this or subscribe to my channel. It would just be nice to feel like I'm not screaming into the void. Because right now, the silence is deafening. I have to know the truth. I can't sit here in this living room, looking at the two people who raised me and pretend that this new, gaping hole in my life doesn't exist. I have to go see her. I have to look Lena in the eye and ask her why I have her smile. My feet carried me out of the living room before my brain had fully processed the decision. I grabbed my keys from the hook by the door, the familiar jingle sounding alien and sharp in the heavy silence of the house. I didn't say goodbye. I couldn't look at Sarah and Mark, couldn't bear the pleading in their eyes. The front door clicked shut behind me, a sound of finality that echoed in my chest. The drive to Lena's was a blur of streetlights smearing across my windshield. Her house was only 10 minutes away, a route so familiar I could have driven it with my eyes closed. Tonight, every turn felt like a step deeper into a dark wood I wasn't sure I could escape. When I pulled up to her small blue house with its perpetually overgrown flower beds, I killed the engine and just sat there, the ticking of the cooling engine the only sound. This was Lena's house, the place of sleepovers, movie marathons, and emergency baking sessions. It was supposed to be a sanctuary. Now it looked like the lair of a monster. My hand trembled as I reached for the door handle. I was here for an answer, but a part of me, a terrified, childish part, wanted to drive away and never look back, to live in the comfortable fiction my life had been. I walked up the stone path, my footsteps loud against the quiet street. Through the large front window, the living room lamp cast a warm, inviting glow, and there she was, Lena. She had her back to me, kneeling on the floor in front of a large, dark wood hope chest that always sat under the window. A chest she always said was just full of old college textbooks and blankets. She was lying. My breath caught in my throat. The lid was open. With a horrifying magnetic pull, I crept closer to the window, hiding in the shadows of a large rose bush. Lena was pulling things out, her movements reverent and slow. First came a small, worn baby blanket with yellow ducks on it, the one my parents said had been lost in a move years ago. My blanket. Then she lifted a tiny, faded hospital bracelet. Even from the window, I could see the name typed on it, Baby Girl Chloe. But the mother's name listed below it wasn't Sarah. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. Then she pulled out a small photo album, not one I'd ever seen. She opened it, and my world stopped. It was full of pictures of a newborn, of me. In some, I was wrapped in that duck-patterned blanket. In others, I was being held, not by Sarah or Mark, by a younger, exhausted but radiant Lena. Her face was full of a kind of love so raw and profound it made me sick. The final blow came when she picked up a small, velvet box. From it, she took the other half of a locket, a perfect match to the one she gave me for my 16th birthday. She clicked it open and stared at the photo inside. My blood ran cold. It wasn't a stranger. It wasn't a lost love. It was her, holding me in that hospital room, her cheek pressed against my tiny, bald head. The empty locket she gave me wasn't a gift. It was a confession. A cruel, silent test. The pieces of the puzzle didn't just fall into place. They slammed together with the force of a car crash. The shared laugh, the crooked smile, the lingering hugs, the way she looked at me like she was starving. She wasn't my aunt. She wasn't my mom's best friend. She was my mother, the woman who gave me away. The woman who had spent the last 17 years watching me, orbiting my life like a ghost, hoarding pieces of me in a secret box. This wasn't just a lie, it was a theft. She had stolen my history, stolen my identity, and left me with a counterfeit life. The shock evaporated, replaced by a wave of white-hot rage so intense it made me dizzy. There was no going back now. I couldn't unsee this. I couldn't pretend. The question of whether I was adopted was gone, replaced by the brutal, undeniable truth. My hand closed around the cold metal of her front doorknob. The time for questions was over. This was a reckoning. The doorknob was cold, a shock of icy reality against my sweat-slicked palm. I twisted it, the latch clicking with a deafening finality. But I didn't push the door open. My rage, a moment ago a roaring inferno, suddenly flickered. What would I even say? You stole my life? You lied to me? The words felt pathetic, unequal to the colossal scale of the betrayal I had just witnessed through the window. A screaming match would solve nothing. It would just be her tears against my fury, a messy private explosion that would leave us all in ruins. No, this felt bigger than that. This felt illegal. My hand fell away from the door. I backed away from the house, from the warm lamplight that now seemed so predatory. I stumbled back to my car, my mind a maelstrom of fractured thoughts. This wasn't a family squabble. This was a conspiracy. A 17-year-long fraud with me as the unwitting victim. Sarah, Mark, Lena. They had conspired to fabricate a person. They had stolen my truth, and that had to be a crime. There are rules for this, right? Systems in place for when people's lives are built on such monumental deception. Instead of driving home, I found myself pulling into the stark, fluorescent-lit parking lot of the local police station. The building was squat and brick, impersonal and solid. It felt like the only solid thing in a world that had turned to liquid. I needed an authority, someone with a badge and a rule book to look at the facts and tell me I wasn't crazy, to validate the violation I felt churning in my gut. I walked in, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. A tired-looking officer with a thick mustache sat behind a high counter, separated from me by a sheet of plexiglass. He looked up from his computer, his expression a practiced blend of boredom and mild curiosity. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice flat. I need to report a crime," I stammered, the words feeling thin and ridiculous in the sterile air. He gestured to a worn plastic chair. "Okay, have a seat. What happened?" I tried to explain. I started with the hope chest, the baby blanket, the hospital bracelet with the wrong mother's name. I told him about the locket, the matching halves, the picture inside. My voice cracked as I described the photos of Lena holding me, a secret history I never knew existed. I told him my whole life, my identity was a lie they had all agreed on. The officer listened, his pen hovering over a notepad, but he didn't write anything down. He just nodded, his eyes betraying a growing weariness. "Okay, let me see if I have this straight," he said when I finally ran out of breath. "You're 17. Your parents, Sarah and Mark, just told you that you're adopted." "Yes, but that's not." He held up a hand. "And you've discovered that your biological mother is your mom's best friend, Lena, who has been in your life the whole time." He summarized it so clinically, stripping away all the rage and betrayal and leaving only the bare, undramatic facts. "She lied. I insisted," my voice rising. "They all lied. They created a false identity for me. Isn't that fraud? They kept my own history from me, locked in a box. It's like she stole me but kept me next door." The officer sighed, a long, drawn-out sound of someone who has heard 1,000 stories of human messiness. "Miss," he said, his tone shifting from patient to patronizing, "I understand this is a huge shock. Finding out you're adopted is a life-changing event for anyone, but it's not a crime. But the deception—" "There's no criminal deception here," he stated, his voice firm, final. "A closed adoption is a private, legal arrangement. What your parents and your biological mother decided to tell you or not tell you is a family matter. It's not something the police get involved in." A cold dread washed over me, extinguishing the last embers of my rage. "So you're not going to do anything?" "There's nothing to do," he said, his gaze already drifting back to his computer screen, dismissing me. "There is no crime to investigate. I suggest you talk to your parents. Maybe consider family counseling. This is a personal issue, not a legal one." I just stared at him. The system hadn't just failed me. It had invalidated me. My earth-shattering cataclysm was, to him, a, quote, personal issue, a dramatic outburst from a teenager who couldn't handle the truth about being adopted. I stood up, my legs feeling unsteady. The solid brick building suddenly felt like a house of cards. I walked out into the cool night air, the automatic doors sliding shut behind me, and the full weight of my isolation crashed down. There were no rules. There was no authority to appeal to. No one was coming to fix this or punish the guilty. The officer's dismissal was a terrifying confirmation. I was utterly and completely alone in this. The truth was my burden to carry, and the reckoning I wanted wasn't going to come from a courtroom. It was going to have to come from me. The drive home was a vacuum. The anger, the shock, the frantic need for justice, it had all been sucked out of me in that sterile police station, leaving a profound, ringing emptiness. A personal issue. The officer's words replayed in my mind, a flat, bureaucratic mantra. My life reduced to a file he wouldn't even open. My stolen history wasn't a crime. It was an inconvenience, a messy domestic drama he had no time for. The world had tilted on its axis, and the only person who seemed to notice was me. I was adrift, and the official, adult world had just cut my life raft loose. A cold clarity began to settle in my bones. There would be no cavalry. No one was going to swoop in and validate the grand larceny of my past. The system didn't fail me. It simply didn't apply to me. This truth was mine alone to wield. When I turned onto my street, a new kind of dread, sharp and acidic, flooded the emptiness. Lena's beat-up sedan was parked in our driveway. My stomach clenched. She was here. Inside my house, the one place that was supposed to be my sanctuary, even from my own parents, had been breached. They hadn't waited for me to come to them. They had brought the source of the infection right to the heart of my world, closing ranks to protect their lie. I cut the engine and sat in the darkness, my car a fragile metal shell. My house, usually a comforting beacon, looked sinister. The warm light in the living room window no longer felt inviting. It felt like the hot glow of an interrogation lamp. They were in there together. Sarah, Mark, and Lena, the architects of Chloe, waiting for their project to come home so they could manage the glitch in the system. My front door, the one I had slammed shut what felt like a lifetime ago, was unlocked. I pushed it open, the hinges groaning softly. I thought maybe I could slip past, get to my room, lock the door, and just breathe for a minute. But they were waiting. I stepped into the entryway, and all three heads snapped in my direction. They were sitting in the living room, a perfect triangle of deception. My parents, Sarah and Mark, were on the floral couch, their bodies angled towards the armchair where Lena sat. They looked like a parole board. Their faces were etched with a practiced, deep concern that made my skin crawl. It wasn't the raw panic I'd left them with. This was something new, something planned. Chloe, honey, oh, thank God. My mom, Sarah, breathed, starting to rise. But Lena held up a hand, a small, subtle gesture that stopped Sarah in her tracks. Lena was in charge. My gaze locked with hers. The pity, the desperate love I'd seen in her eyes my whole life was gone. It was replaced by a look of grim resolve. This was damage control. Chloe, we were so worried, Lena said, her voice the smooth, calming balm she'd always used on me after a scraped knee or a failed test. It sounded obscene now. Your parents called me. I think we all need to talk about this. Calmly. I didn't move. I just stood there, dripping rainwater onto the welcome mat, taking in the scene. The united front. The carefully arranged tableau of concerned adults ready to handle the hysterical teenager. They thought this was about one secret. They thought the only thing they had to explain was why they'd kept the fact that I was adopted from me. They had no idea I had looked through the window. They didn't know I had seen the contents of that chest, that I had seen the truth with my own eyes. They were here to give me their sanitized, approved version of the story, and they expected me to accept it. They thought they still held all the cards. A small, bitter smile touched my lips. The time for their questions, their explanations, their lies was over. Now it was my turn. Calmly? The word left my mouth small and sharp, a shard of glass in the thick, cloying atmosphere of concern they had manufactured. You want to talk about this calmly? My eyes stayed locked on Lena. Sarah and Mark faded into the floral pattern of the couch, their worried faces just part of the scenery. It was only her. The woman in the armchair, the puppet master who had pulled the strings of my life for 17 years, now looking at me with that calculated, therapeutic gaze. They thought this was about a single, simple lie, that I was "adopted," a neat, tidy secret they could now manage with open communication and gentle voices. I took a slow step into the living room, the squelch of my wet sneakers on the hardwood floor the only sound. You were worried, I said, my voice dangerously even. Were you worried when I was at your house, just a few minutes ago? Lena's composure didn't slip, but a flicker of something, surprise, maybe fear, disturbed the placid surface of her eyes. Mark and Sarah exchanged a confused glance. Chloe, what are you talking about? Mark asked, his voice rough with anxiety. I ignored him. My world had shrunk to the space between me and the woman who gave me her smile. You should really draw your curtains, I continued, my voice dropping lower. The ones on the big window in your living room. Anyone could just walk up and look right in. They might see you kneeling on the floor. They might see you with that old hope chest you keep under the window. The color drained from Lena's face. Her mask of calm, resolve cracked, revealing the raw panic beneath. Sarah shot a wide-eyed, questioning look at her, a look that said, What chest? They might see you pull out a baby blanket, I said, taking another deliberate step closer, one with yellow ducks on it, one I was told was lost in a move. Sarah made a small, wounded sound, her hand flying to her mouth. They might see a hospital bracelet, I went on, my voice a merciless metronome, ticking off the pieces of my stolen life, for a baby named Chloe, with a mother's name on it, a name that wasn't Sarah. Lena was shrinking into the armchair, her body curling inward, as if to protect herself from my words. She was no longer in charge. She was exposed, a creature of the dark dragged into the light. And the pictures, Lena, a whole album of them, pictures I've never seen. My voice finally cracked. The ice in my veins shot through with a tremor of the raw pain I'd been holding back. Pictures of you, holding me, looking at me like you loved me. I was standing right in front of her now, towering over her. The parole board was disbanded. It was just me and the defendant. But my favorite part, I whispered, the words dripping with a venom I didn't know I possessed, was the locket, the other half to the empty one you gave me. It wasn't a test, was it? It was a clue, a breadcrumb from the mother who abandoned her child but couldn't bear to let her go. I reached into my own pocket, my fingers closing around the cold, empty locket she'd given me. I pulled it out, letting it swing from its chain between us. Lena flinched, her eyes fixed on it as if it were a weapon. They told me I was adopted, I said, my gaze finally sweeping to Sarah and Mark, their faces a tableau of horror and dawning comprehension. But that wasn't the whole truth, was it? That was just the easy part, the part you all agreed on. I turned back to Lena, whose face was now wet with silent tears. The time for questions was over. The time for their lies was over. There was only one truth left in the room, and I was going to make her say it. Why is your picture in that locket, Lena? I demanded, my voice rising, breaking free of its cold restraint. Why do I have your smile? Why did you keep all of it, all of me, locked away in a box? Tell me. My demand hung in the air, a declaration of war. The living room, once my sanctuary, was now a courtroom, and I was the prosecutor, judge, and jury? Lena's face crumpled. The last vestiges of her calculated composure dissolved into a mess of guttural sobs. She looked from me to Mark, her eyes pleading. And in that one desperate glance, I saw it. The missing piece. The final, unthinkable connection. Chloe, please, Sarah whispered, her voice a fragile thread. Let her explain. We were going to tell you everything. No, I snapped, my head whipping toward her. You were going to tell me a story you all wrote 17 years ago. You were going to tell me I was adopted, and that Lena was a scared teenager who made a noble choice. But you weren't going to tell me the truth, were you? My gaze shot back to Lena, then landed with the force of a physical blow on Mark, my dad, the man whose face I thought I'd borrowed. Were you, Dad? Mark flinched as if I'd struck him. He couldn't meet my eyes. He just stared at his hands, his knuckles white, the same way they'd been when he and Sarah first told me. But this silence was different. It wasn't just guilt. It was shame. A deep, foundational shame that I now realize had been the quiet hum beneath the surface of our entire family. I was 19, Lena finally choked out, her voice raw and broken. I was stupid. I was in love with a man I couldn't have. The air left my lungs. The floor seemed to drop out from under me. A man I couldn't have. My eyes, wide with a dawning, sickening horror, stayed fixed on Mark. He wouldn't look up. He just sank further into the couch, his whole body seeming to collapse under the weight of my stare. Sarah was weeping openly now, her face buried in her hands, her shoulders shaking. She wasn't weeping for me. She was weeping for herself, for a wound that had clearly never healed. The lie wasn't that I was adopted. That was just the cover story. The real, rotten truth was so much worse. I wasn't just the product of a teenage mistake. I was the product of an affair, of a betrayal so profound it had poisoned all three of them, and me by extension. It wasn't a stranger, I whispered, the realization hitting me with nauseating force. I looked at Mark's dark, unruly hair, so like my own, my deep-set brown eyes. It was never a coincidence. It was never a cute family resemblance to his side of the family. It was just simple, brutal genetics. It was you. Mark finally looked up, and his face was a ruin. The kind, steady man I had worshipped my entire life was gone, replaced by a stranger hollowed out by a decades-old secret. "Chloe," he croaked, his voice thick with unshed tears. "I am so sorry." "Sorry?" The word was a strangled gasp. The rage I felt earlier was a child's tantrum compared to the cold, cosmic fury that filled me now. "You let me live my entire life as a lie. You let me believe I was yours and Mom's, Sarah's. I couldn't call her Mom." The word tasted like ash in my mouth. "You let her," I spat, gesturing at the sobbing woman in the armchair, "be my fun aunt. You built this whole fake life on top of your dirty secret." This wasn't an adoption. This was a cover-up. The initial shock of being "adopted" had been the key, the single loose thread that allowed me to unravel this entire monstrous tapestry. That one lie, intended to protect the bigger one, had been their undoing. It had armed me with a suspicion they hadn't accounted for, sending me to that window, to the truth they kept in a box. "We did it to keep you," Sarah cried, her voice muffled by her hands. "I couldn't lose him, and Lena, she was going to give you up anyway. I couldn't let you go to strangers. I thought we could. I thought we could make it right. I wanted to be your mother so badly." "You didn't want to be my mother," I said, my voice devoid of all emotion now. The fury had burned out, leaving behind nothing but the cold, hard truth. "You wanted to possess the evidence. You wanted to own his mistakes so you could pretend it never happened." I looked between the three of them, the adulterer, the other woman, and the wife who held it all together with a lie, my creators, the architects of my counterfeit life. They weren't a family. They were co-conspirators in a crime for which there was no law. The officer was right. This was a personal issue, and it was mine to solve. I turned and walked toward the door, my movement stiff and robotic. "Chloe, wait! Where are you going?" Mark yelled, scrambling to his feet. I stopped, my hand on the doorknob, the same one I had hesitated at less than an hour ago. I didn't turn around. I couldn't bear to look at their faces anymore. "I don't know," I said to the door, my voice flat and empty, "but I know I can't stay here. This isn't my home. It never was." I don't remember driving. I remember the click of the front door, a sound that severed a 17-year-old connection to everything I had ever known. Then, blacktop and blurred lights, and the rhythmic thump, thump, thump of my windshield wipers smearing the rain. I ended up in the parking lot of a 24-hour grocery store, the engine off, the only light, the garish green glow of the pharmacy sign. The adrenaline that had fueled my righteous fury, that had turned my voice to ice and my words to weapons, drained out of me all at once, leaving a hollow, vibrating weakness in my limbs. My hands, still clutching the steering wheel, began to shake violently. A deep, shuddering cold settled into my bones. It wasn't from the rain. It was the chilling realization that I was, in the most literal sense, nobody. Chloe, the daughter of Sarah and Mark, was a fiction, the spitting image of her dad's side of the family, the girl raised in that house, on that street. A ghost. The truth was so much uglier, so much more pathetic than I could have imagined. I wasn't the cherished secret of a scared teenager. I was the evidence of a sordid affair, a human cover-up. My existence was the price of Sarah's marriage and Mark's reputation. The fact that I was "adopted" wasn't the lie. It was the lie they used to hide the real sin. My mind replayed the scene at the police station, the officer's condescending dismissal. A personal issue. He was wrong. He had to be wrong. This was more than a messy family drama. This was the systematic erasure of a person. They hadn't just hidden the truth. They had manufactured a new one and stamped it onto my life. And that's when the thought surfaced, cutting through the fog of my shock. A birth certificate. I had one. I had to get my driver's permit. I'd seen it once, a long time ago, a formal-looking document Mark had pulled from a file box. It listed Sarah and Mark as my parents, but the hospital bracelet I'd seen through the window, the one tucked away in Lena's hope chest, listed her name. One of them was a lie. And faking a birth certificate that wasn't a personal issue, that was a crime, a real one, a felony. The shaking in my hand subsided, replaced by a cold, sharp resolve. I started the car. I didn't drive home. I drove back to the police station. The same tired officer was behind the plexiglass, looking even more bored than before. He glanced up as I approached, a flicker of annoyance in his eyes. "Miss, I told you." "I'm not here to report a family dispute," I said, my voice flat and steady. It didn't sound like my own. "I'm here to report a felony, specifically the falsification of a government document, my birth certificate." He blinked, his posture straightening slightly. This was different. This wasn't a hysterical teenager anymore. "I have reason to believe my legal birth certificate is fraudulent," I stated, keeping my tone as clinical as his had been with me. "I have recently obtained information that my biological mother is a woman named Lena Rivas and that she is named as such on my original hospital records. However, my state-issued birth certificate lists Sarah and Mark Peterson as my parents. This was not a legal adoption. This was a private arrangement to conceal the identity of my biological parents. I am the evidence of that fraud." I laid it out for him, stripping away all the emotion. I told him about the hope chest, not as a source of pain, but as the location of evidence. The baby blanket, the photo album, and most importantly, the hospital bracelet. "The bracelet with Ms. Rivas's name on it is in a wooden chest at her residence," I said, giving him Lena's address. "It corroborates my claim that the birth certificate listing Sarah and Mark Peterson is a forgery." He was listening now, really listening. He picked up his pen and finally began to write. The words fraud, forgery, and falsification of records were hooks the system could actually grab onto. My pain was abstract, but a forged document was concrete. "You're alleging that your legal guardians are not your legal guardians?" he asked, his tone now serious, professional. "I'm alleging that the document that makes them my legal guardians is a lie," I corrected him. "And I'm asking you to help me prove it. I'm a minor. I can't just demand hospital records or a court order to see what's in that chest. But you can." He stared at me for a long moment, his gaze assessing. He saw the truth in my eyes, the cold, hard certainty of it. My first visit, I had come looking for a surrogate parent, for an authority to fix my broken heart. This time, I had come as a citizen, reporting a crime and providing the path to evidence. I wasn't asking for his sympathy. I was demanding his action. He finally nodded, a slow, decisive movement. "Okay," he said, his voice firm. "Let's open an inquiry." A wave of something that felt terrifyingly like triumph washed through me. The system hadn't worked for the heartbroken girl who'd been lied to, but it would work for the evidence I now carried. I had taken their secret, the one they used to control and define me, and I had turned it into a weapon. The reckoning was no longer just my own. It was official. I left the police station and stepped back into the rain. It was a different rain now. It wasn't washing anything clean. It was just cold and wet. The official inquiry, the case number scrawled on a slip of paper in my pocket, felt less like a victory and more like the first page of an autopsy report. My autopsy. I had successfully reported the death of Chloe Peterson. Now I just had to live with the ghost. I got back in my car and just sat there, the wipers still keeping their useless hypnotic rhythm. I couldn't go home. The word itself was a lie. It was their house, a stage set for a play I never knew I was in, and I couldn't go to Lena's. That house was a museum of my stolen childhood, a mausoleum. I had nowhere to go. The full, crushing weight of that landed on me. I was 17, legally a minor and completely homeless. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from Sarah. "Chloe, please just come home. We can fix this." Another buzz. "Mark, I love you. Nothing changes that. Please." Another. "Lena, I know you hate me. I deserve it. But please be safe. Let us know you're safe." The messages were a discordant chorus of desperation, each one a fresh wave of nausea. They thought this was something that could be fixed. They still didn't get it. You can't fix a foundation that was built on sand. You can only watch it wash away. I turned the phone off and shoved it deep into my backpack. The silence was immediate and absolute. I drove until the streetlights thinned out and found a deserted corner of a park, pulling in under the dense, dripping branches of an old oak tree. I killed the engine and reclined the driver's seat. This was my home now. A 2012 sedan that smelled faintly of stale French fries and air freshener. Sleep didn't come. Instead, my mind became a torture chamber. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw their faces, Mark's, crumbling into a ruin of shame, Sarah's, contorted in a grief that was entirely for herself, and Lena's, her tears not of apology, but of being caught. The initial shock of finding out I was "adopted," felt like a quaint memory from another lifetime, a simple, clean wound. It was a word with a community, with stories of reunion and understanding, but I hadn't been "adopted." That word was a luxury, a kindness they hadn't afforded me. I was hidden. I was the consequence of a tawdry secret, laundered through a lie to appear legitimate. The word "adopted" was the most elegant part of the whole ugly conspiracy, and hearing it now felt like the deepest insult of all. I must have drifted off, because I was suddenly in our living room, but the floral couch was gone, replaced by Lena's hope chest. The lid creaked open, and instead of blankets and photos, my own face stared back at me, my mouth open in a silent scream. The single dimple on my left cheek deepened, twisting my smile into a grotesque sneer. Lena's sneer. I jolted awake, my heart hammering against my ribs, the scream caught in my throat. My own face was becoming alien to me. When I caught my reflection in the dark rearview mirror, I saw the ghost of Mark's guilt in the set of my eyes, the ghost of Lena's deception in the curve of my mouth. I was a walking, breathing collage of their sins. A profound, terrifying anxiety began to seep into me. I had set something in motion at that police station. Something official and irreversible. I had handed the keys to my life over to a system of strangers. What would happen now? Would they come for Sarah and Mark? Would they take Lena's hope chest? The thought of officers in their house, of them putting my life into evidence bags, made me feel sick. The reckoning I had wanted so badly was no longer a cathartic explosion. It was a slow, grinding, bureaucratic process, and I had no idea what it would leave of us. it was over. I had wanted the truth, and now I had it. It was a cold, heavy thing, and I was beginning to realize it might be the only thing I had left. The sun rose, filtering weak and gray through the rain-streaked windshield. My neck was stiff, and a deep, gnawing cold had settled in my joints. I was hungry. For a moment, the sheer banality of it, the hunger, the crick in my neck, was a relief. It was a problem I could solve. I could go buy a coffee and a stale pastry. But then the rest of it came rushing back in, and the hunger curdled into nausea. I was Chloe Doe, a 17-year-old Jane Doe, sitting in a damp car in a public park because the only 3 adults who were supposed to be my safe harbor were the very rocks I had shipwrecked on. I knew I couldn't stay hidden in my car forever. The investigation I had started would need its star witness. With a sense of dread, I pulled my phone from my backpack and powered it on. It vibrated violently for nearly a minute, a frantic, desperate buzzing against my palm. A flood of texts, dozens of missed calls from Sarah, Mark, and Lena. I ignored them, my thumb hovering over a new voicemail notification. The number was the police station's main line. His voice was exactly as I remembered it, flat and tired, but the patronizing edge was gone. Miss Peterson, Chloe, the officer from the front desk said, "This is Officer Miller. We need you to come in to provide a formal, recorded statement regarding your allegations. Please call me back to arrange a time. It's important we do this as soon as possible." The personal issue had a name now. It had allegations. It was real. I drove back to the station, the building looking just as squat and impersonal in the daylight. This time, I didn't have to wait behind the plexiglass. Officer Miller met me at the door. He wasn't smiling, but his eyes held a new, grudging respect. He didn't see a hysterical teenager anymore. He saw a witness. He saw a problem he couldn't dismiss. "Thank you for coming in so quickly," he said, his tone all business. He led me down a sterile hallway to a small, windowless room containing a metal table and 3 chairs. A woman was already sitting there, a kind-looking woman with a weary smile and a folder full of papers. "Chloe, this is Eleanor Vance from Child and Family Services," Miller said. "She'll be sitting in while we take your statement." So this was the next stage of the system. First the dismissal, then the investigation, now the intervention. Eleanor gave me a gentle nod. "I'm just here to listen, Chloe," she said, "and to help you figure out what your next steps are." I just nodded, my throat tight. Miller set up a small recorder on the table, stated the date and time, and asked me to recount everything from the beginning. And so I did. I told them about my life, the confession on the couch, the uncanny resemblance to Lena. I described what I saw through the window, listing the contents of the hope chest like a crime scene inventory. When I got to the climax, the confrontation in the living room, Lena's confession, Mark's shattering admission, my voice didn't break. It was cold, clinical. I was a narrator telling someone else's story. "So, to be clear," Miller said after I had finished, "your understanding is that the official story was that you were adopted, but the truth is, you were the product of an affair between your legal father, Mark Peterson, and his wife's best friend, Lena Rivas?" "I wasn't adopted, I said, the word tasting like poison. I was a secret they hid in plain sight. The adoption story was the lie they used to make the cover-up legal. The birth certificate they filed is a forgery." Miller nodded, making a note. "Based on your testimony, we're securing a warrant to search Lena Rivas's residence for the evidence you described, specifically the hope chest and its contents." The room felt suddenly airless. A warrant. They were going to go into her house, my mother's house, and take my baby pictures, my blanket, my hospital bracelet. They were going to put my past into evidence bags. The reckoning I had demanded was no longer an abstract concept. It had paperwork. When the recording was turned off, Eleanor, the social worker, leaned forward. "Chloe," she began, her voice soft, "I know this is incredibly difficult. We need to talk about where you're going to stay. We have emergency placements, foster homes." "I'm not going to a foster home," I said, the words coming out sharper than I intended. "You're a minor without a legal guardian," she said, her tone patient but firm. "If your allegations are true, Sarah and Mark are not your legal guardians, and your current living situation is untenable. The system is here to protect you." I looked from her well-meaning face to Miller's impassive one. This was the system. An officer who had to be shamed into doing his job, and a social worker with a folder of temporary solutions for a permanent problem. They hadn't failed me this time, but they hadn't saved me either. They had simply absorbed me into their process. I had forced them to act, to hold the people who lied to me accountable under the law. But the change I had wrought was that I had successfully traded a family of lies for a family of strangers in uniforms and offices, and their protection felt just as cold and hollow as the empty locket still in my pocket. 3 months, 94 days. That's how long it's been since my life was incinerated. Now I live in the aftermath, a landscape of ash and silence. My new home is a state-run group house, a place with beige walls, mismatched furniture donated by strangers, and the lingering smell of disinfectant. It's a clean, well-lighted place for broken kids. I have a bed, 3 meals a day, and a complete and utter lack of history. In a way, it's the most honest home I've ever had. My week is structured by appointments. Every Tuesday and Thursday, I sit across from Eleanor Vance, the social worker who has become the de facto manager of my life. She doesn't push. She just asks questions and listens, her pen scratching against her notepad, documenting the slow, painful process of my unbecoming. We talk about the legal case, which has taken on a life of its own. The warrant was served. The hope chest and its contents are now exhibits in the case of the state versus Mark Peterson, Sarah Peterson, and Lena Rivas. Forgery, perjury, conspiracy. The words are heavy, official, and have nothing to do with the hollowed-out feeling in my chest. "You've been quiet today, Chloe," Eleanor said during our last session, her voice gentle. "What's on your mind?" I looked out the window at the gray sky. "I need to go back to the house," I said, the words feeling strange in my mouth, "to get my things." She nodded slowly. "We can arrange that. A supervised visit. The house is empty right now. Your Sarah and Mark are staying with his sister pending the hearings." A supervised visit to my own bedroom. It sounded like a trip to the zoo, but I needed to do it. The ghost of Chloe Peterson still lived there, her posters on the wall, her clothes in the closet. I couldn't move forward until I had performed my own exorcism. Eleanor drove me. Pulling onto my old street felt like entering a dream. The houses were the same, the lawns were mowed, but it was all hazy, unreal. She unlocked the front door with a key from a manila envelope and let me walk in alone. The house was cold and silent, holding its breath. I walked through the living room, past the floral couch where the first lie had been told, past the armchair where the final truth had been ripped out of Lena. They were just pieces of furniture now, stripped of their power. My room was the hardest. It was a perfect time capsule of a girl who no longer existed. Band posters, yearbooks filled with inside jokes, a collection of snow globes on the dresser. I had brought 3 empty cardboard boxes. I started with my clothes, then my books. I was methodical, dispassionate. I was a stranger packing up a dead girl's belongings. Then I saw it, sitting on my nightstand. A framed photo of me and Sarah at my 5th grade graduation. She's beaming, her arm wrapped around me, and I'm holding up a certificate for Best Imagination, my face alight with a gap-toothed grin. My carefully constructed wall crumbled. I sank onto the edge of my bed, the photo in my hands, a sob catching in my throat. She had loved me. That part was real. The picnics, the bedtime stories, the way she taught me to ride a bike, all of it was real. Mark, teaching me guitar, his patience endless. Lena, showing me how to be bold, how to laugh from my gut. They were liars. They were criminals. But they had also raised me. And in that moment, sitting in the ruins of my childhood bedroom, a strange thought occurred to me. The word I had come to hate, the one that felt like the ultimate insult, shifted in my mind. I hadn't been, adopted, legally. The paperwork was a fraud, but I had been raised by people who were not my biological mother. My life was the result of a choice, A terrible, selfish, cowardly choice to raise a child that wasn't, in the traditional sense, theirs to raise. I had more in common with the other kids at the group home, the ones with actual case files and social workers from birth, than I had ever realized. My story was uglier, messier, but the core of it was the same. My parents were not my parents. I wiped my eyes on my sleeve and stood up. I gently placed the photo face down in one of the boxes. I wouldn't display it, not now, maybe not ever, but I couldn't throw it away. It was part of the truth, too. The lie and the love were tangled up so tightly they had become the same thing. I finished packing, leaving the posters and the trophies behind. I was only taking the things that felt like mine, the books that shaped my thoughts, the music that felt like my own heartbeat, the clothes I chose for myself. I left the boxes by the front door for Eleanor to help me carry. Before I left, I walked back to the living room and stood in the center of the rug. I wasn't a ghost here anymore. I wasn't a victim trapped in a crime scene. I was just a visitor. This wasn't my home. It was just a house where I used to live. And I, Chloe, was a girl who had been adopted by a lie. But the lie was over. And for the first time in 94 days, I felt like I was finally ready to start living. The day of the first preliminary hearing, I wore a black dress. It felt appropriate, like I was attending a funeral. In a way, I was. I sat in the back of the small, stuffy courtroom, a ghost watching the proceedings. Eleanor sat beside me, a silent, solid presence. Across the room, I saw them, not as Mom, Dad, and Aunt Lena, but as Sarah, Mark, and Lena, 3 defendants listening as a prosecutor outlined the charges against them. Forgery. Conspiracy to commit fraud. They looked smaller than I remembered, stripped of the power they once held over me. The righteous fury I had felt was gone, replaced by a profound, weary sadness. They weren't monsters, they were just people. Weak, selfish, terrified people who had built a cage of lies and then locked themselves inside it with me. I didn't stay for the whole thing. After the charges were read, I stood up and walked out, Eleanor trailing behind me. I didn't need to hear any more. The system I had set in motion was grinding forward, and its conclusion no longer felt like my victory. It was just a sad, necessary ending to a story that should never have been written. Back in my room at the group home, I finally opened the last of the 3 cardboard boxes from my old life. I'd been avoiding it. This one held the sentimental things, the artifacts. I pulled out the worn copy of my favorite book, the silver locket Lena gave me, now hanging empty on a hook on my wall, and at the very bottom, the framed photo of me and Sarah at my 5th grade graduation. I looked at her face, beaming with a pride that was so real, so fierce. The love was real. I knew that now. It was a selfish, possessive love, a love born from a desperate need to paper over a crack in her own life, but it was love all the same. They lied to me every day for 17 years, but they also packed my lunch, kissed my forehead, and held me when I had nightmares. The lie wasn't that I was loved. The lie was the story they told themselves, and me, to make that love feel legitimate. They committed a crime, forging documents to create a legal fiction, but their biggest failure was in not trusting that their love could have stood on its own, without the scaffolding of lies. They were so afraid of the word, the one I came to despise, adopted, They saw it as a mark of failure, a confession of their messy secret. So they stole the word, twisted it, and used it as a shield. But sitting here, in this room that is mine only because of the truth, I realized something. The legal paperwork was a fraud, a felony. But in the truest sense of the word, I was adopted, not by loving parents in a clean, legal process, but into a complicated, desperate, and broken family. I was adopted by a woman who couldn't bear to lose her husband, and by a man drowning in his own shame. I was adopted by their lies, raised in the shadow of their secret. Accepting that doesn't excuse them, it doesn't forgive them, but it allows me to finally define my own past, to take the word back from them. It's no longer their lie. It's my truth. I gently placed the photo back in the box. I don't know if I'll ever display it, but I won't throw it away. It's a part of my story, my real story. I'm Chloe. I'm the daughter of a woman who loved me from afar and a man who couldn't claim me. I was raised by two other people who loved me enough to build a fortress of lies to keep me. My foundation is cracked, but it's real. And for the first time, I feel safe standing on it. The future is a blank page, and my room might be beige and boring, but it's honest. And it's mine. It's been a long road to get here, and I know I have a long way to go, but I'm not screaming into the void anymore. Thanks for listening to my story. It's made me feel a little less alone in all this. If you want to see what comes next, like and subscribe. I'm kind of curious to see what happens too.